Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Minecraft Bedrock Edition 1.2. My name is slicedlime, and as I was saying in my update video for this version, there is a new command parsing system in this version. And it is the first major thing that you will see in a Minecraft game that I have worked on. I promised you in that video that I would be going through all the details of what that actually means. So that is what this video is going to be about. We're going to be talking about this new command parsing system. Now, first of all, the work I did didn't specifically change a whole bunch of commands. You could say that the command parsing system is what takes your text. So for instance, if I type /setBlock and then some coordinate and then stone. Now, this whole thing here on the command line is not really a command that the game can run without first figuring out what this means. This is a line of text, and it is the task of the command parsing system to turn this into something that the game can run. Now, it started out to fix some problems with the performance of the previous system. If you did complex execute commands with the previous system, it would cause a significant amount of lag, and so that is the primary purpose that I did this. But along the way, I introduced a whole bunch of missing features and other improvements to the system, so performance is certainly not all. Even though if you're using nested executes, the performance in this version is going to be vastly superior to the performance in previous versions. Now, since the changes to the system aren't specifically about commands, but about how the game interprets what you type into a command, this means that these changes have much more broad application. The improvements that I did affect many commands. You'll see what I mean shortly. Anyway, let's take a look at some stuff. So let's first of all say another example with /setBlock. Now, first of all, you'll see that it says position X, Y, and Z and then a block, and optionally a data value and replace, destroy, or keep. Previously, this was very much delimited by space. And what does that mean? Well, it means that whenever you put in a space, that would be the end of that argument. So, for instance, I could put in setBlock 1, 2, and 3, but if I put in 1 and 2 spaces in 2 and 3, that would break the command. That is no longer the case, so you can put in any number of spaces that you want, and that actually goes for other places as well. And one place where it's especially useful is inside of selector arguments. So previously, when you put something in here, you put mode equals creative or something, then you couldn't put spaces in here, so you got something bunched up like this, where you'd have all of these things packed in, and then if you try to navigate around here or try to read this thing, it's very hard to read. So now you can put in any number of spaces that you want here, actually, and it won't matter. The parser is not dependent on white space to understand this line. So for instance, if I, just for test, did this, then we can see on the line above that the game is still understanding what I'm typing. And now that I come to a command here, you get a full list of all the commands, so the game is understanding what could possibly come next. And that is another difference between the previous system and this one. Now the game will always understand what you're typing until you type something wrong. So previously, if you would type in /execute and then something, you would get no autocomplete on the following command. Now, if I type fill here, for instance, we'll see that at the bottom it says execute ... and then fill. So the game understands that it's now a fill command that you're typing, and it will fill in the autocomplete for that. Another place where it didn't understand what could come before was in here. So you'll see now I have creative as an autocomplete option. So the game now understands that if I type M equals inside of a selector list, I could get A, adventure, C, creative, or S, survival. We don't have spectator mode in this version of the game yet. So that's all the options that could come there, but it also could say not, and then one of those. So it could be not C, which means anything that isn't creative, for instance. So those are some of the major changes to how you type in commands and how the commands are auto-completed and the help you get while you're typing. Now, there are many more features to what you can actually do. One of the biggest one being @s, a new selector. There's actually a complete video about @s previously on the channel. I'll try to link that in a card right here, so you can go and check it out if you want. After I made this change to Bedrock Edition and added @s, it was ported back into Java Edition and it's been released there before this change came out. What @s is a reference to self. So whatever thing is executing a command will be selected by @s. So for instance, if I do execute @e, effect @s, and something. Now that is going to mean that the effect is applied to the entity that is running the command. So for instance, this entity right here. What are the benefits of using @s? Well, there are several. One benefit is that you don't have to repeat selector arguments in order to make sure that the command that follows an execute command is targeting the same entity. You can just do @s and you're guaranteed to get the same entity. Using @s is also vastly less performance heavy on the game. So if you're doing a whole bunch of command stuff and you're using @s in there instead of @p or @e with a bunch of selector arguments, then you're going to cause a less of a performance impact on the game by using @s. Of course, you can also use @s with selector arguments. So you can, for instance, do @s L equals 10 to do something on the currently executing entity, but only if it has a level 10. Now that brings us to another thing that has happened in this version. Check out this list. It contains a lot of selector arguments, some of which were not available before. So that goes for a whole bunch of things that used to exist in Java Edition but didn't exist in this version of the game. And that includes C equals, so you couldn't select properly by count, the L and LM ones, so you couldn't select properly by level. There's the dx, dy, and dz arguments. So you can do dx equals 10 to select things in a box of length 10 from the current position. That's dx, dy, and dc. They are box selectors. And then there's one more set of selectors. There are rxm, rx, rym, and ry. They are rotation selectors. So all of those didn't exist in Bedrock Edition before, and they do now. They work mostly like in Java Edition, or in some cases like Java Edition is going to work in version 1.13 of that. Specifically, there are some differences in terms of when something gets aligned to the block grid or not in terms of positions. One more thing that has changed about selector arguments is that you are now allowed to have multiple of the same selector arguments where it makes sense. So for instance, you can have several type arguments as long as they are all negative. So you could say type equals not pig and also type equals not cow. That is a valid combination in this version of the parser that wasn't valid before. There's another important change here too, in that all of the things that you put into a selector argument before could only be an integer, so a whole number, which means that if you put x equals something, you could put x equals 15, but not x equals 15.4 or whatever. You can do that now, so you can put 15.4 here. You can even do a radius of like half a block if you want that. That's perfectly acceptable now. And not only that, these x, y, and z selectors can now also be relative. So you could do x equals 15.4, y equals tilde 1.4 if you want, and z equals tilde 14 or whatever, minus 14. It's anything goes in here that is relative or a value, and that value can now be a decimal value, and it can also be relative. So you can use tildes with x, y, and z in here. That goes for dx and dy and dz. And that's the difference from the Java Edition. These are no longer restricted to being integers, so you can actually select half a block if you want. And of course that goes for the rotational selectors as well. Now, this means that there is no real reason for us to clamp to the block grid anymore. So these positions are absolute positions. They represent a point in the world, not a block, and therefore there's no automatic selection of a whole block. So that's the difference between how this version works and how the currently released Java Edition version works. In conjunction with that, there are a bunch of things that used to be clamped to block positions that aren't anymore. So for instance, if I did something like this before, it wouldn't move me at all. And you see that it does now. So a bunch of things that were clamped to block positions are now just a position, a free-form position anywhere in the world. And if it is used to point out a certain block, then that will be decided as late as possible after we've moved the execution position exactly to where it needs to be. So that should make it a lot easier to point out specific positions in the world without having some of them randomly put you in the middle of a block, or even worse, at the corner of a block. Now, there's another big thing with how you give coordinates in this version, and to do that, I'm going to have to sort of look here. So, when you do something with coordinates, you have the option of giving relative coordinates. So, for instance, set block with tildes, right? You can do this. Let's do a obsidian block here. And now, if I'm setting this 1 block down and 1 block to the positive x direction, then that happens there. So this is the positive x direction, apparently. So let's stand with that on our right hand side, and let's do this again, but instead let's put 1 block in the positive z direction. That's there. So you kind of have this coordinate system that is relative to the world. Now, if you look down on just here, I'm going to show you a new thing. So what you can also do in this version is instead of using tildes, you can use carets. Now, that might seem to be sort of the same thing. These are relative positions too, so if I do an offset of 1, then we're still going to have an offset of 1 in some direction. So let's do obsidian again, but this time that came downwards. But I put it in Z, right? Which is a little bit unexpected. So if I put it here, now I have it in front of me. How does that make sense? Well, because these are local coordinates. So if you break that block, notice how I'm looking directly down. That means that up for my head, if you say the up direction of my head, is actually forwards, right? And up 1 block is right in front of my feet, because my position is in my feet, even though my head is the thing that is tilted down. It's a little bit hard to understand sometimes, but I'll try to put some angles in here to sort of explain what I mean. These things are local coordinates. That means that 1 in X is always to my left. 1 in Z is always to my front. Now, front in this case was a little bit down as well, because I'm not entirely straight. But if I do this, then you'll see that the 1 happens here. Now, people are calling this raycasting. It's not entirely a correct name for it. It's not raycasting. It's a local coordinate system. You can use it to implement raycasting, but strictly speaking, raycasting is casting a ray against a collision and seeing where it hits. But this represents something that you haven't really been able to do in Minecraft before. Specifically, you haven't been able to do it easily before. Now, if I do 10, you'll see that the block ends up 10 blocks right in front of me. And regardless of how I turn, it will end up 10 blocks in front of me. The block is always 10 blocks in front of me as I look. Now, my direction, like I said, is anchored in my feet. That is a little bit problematic if you're trying to use this to figure out exactly what I'm looking at, because my position is up a bit. You can use some summoning tricks to figure this out, especially on Java Edition, where there's more support for selecting things by scoreboards, by name, setting things in NBT and such. There will be more support for stuff like that in this edition later as well. But for now, this is a first step to being able to figure out and to do things relative to the direction of an entity, rather than just a relative position in the world, but still fixed directions. And there's more to that actually, so let's go find, hello, what are you? You are a rabbit. Good. We found ourselves a rabbit friend here. Now let's say that I want to do something with the player to make the player look in the direction of this rabbit. That has also been not impossible, but very work intensive and very inefficient before. So to that end, there is a change to the teleport command, which in this version of the game, in the Bedrock Edition, is the same. So TP and teleport are exactly the same thing. So you can see that the completion is exactly the same thing. We can use /TP just to make it shorter here. So what I want to do is I want to teleport myself to exactly where I am. Now I can give myself a rotation on the y-axis and the x-axis. like that, but that doesn't really help me look at another entity or indeed a specific position in the world. So to that end, I've added a new argument to the end of teleport, which is facing. So you can put in facing here and then a look at position or a look at entity. So I can put in 000, for instance, if I want to look at position 000 in the world, and that will turn me towards that direction, which is apparently 000. Now there's also, if I want to look at my rabbit friend here, then I can also put in a selector instead for an entity that I'm looking at. So we can do type equals not player and c equals 1 here to be looking at the closest not player, which would be the rabbit, I would assume. So now I turn towards the rabbit right there. That is another change, and that's a change to the specific teleport command, but I feel like it's an important enough thing that it is worthwhile to talk about here. Now we're going to talk about a couple of other commands as well. One change to the parser as such is there used to be a restriction that you only have one selector in a /say or in a message overall. That is fixed. You will be able to do any number of selectors inside of a /say or /me or /tell or whatever you want, assuming that you have operator status. Otherwise you are not allowed to put in selectors into your messages. Now there are some other changes too. There is a time set, has gotten a couple of other handy shortcuts. So you can put time set midnight to go directly to midnight, and time set noon to get directly to noon. I just figured those are pretty helpful shorthands for times that you might want to go to. And there's another thing with the weather, which is new, which is weather query. Now, that does give an output, but since we don't have scoreboards, there's no real good way to react to it yet. But once we do get scoreboards, this could be an interesting thing to keep in mind, that we have easy weather query on this version of the game now. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit quickly about something that wasn't my change. This was implemented by another developer, or several others actually, but mainly one other developer. And what it is the ticking area command. So there's a new command, it's called ticking area, and it has add, remove, remove all, and list essentially. So there are a couple of different ways that you can add and remove ticking areas, and then you can list all of them that you have. So if I do list now up front, there are no ticking areas in the current dimension, and these all, they work on the current dimension you're in. So if you're trying to add a ticking area, you're adding an area for the dimension you're running the command in. Now, a ticking area is, let's call it a better concept for controlling things that would on Java Edition be done in the spawn chunks. So if you aren't familiar, Java Edition has spawn chunks that are always loaded. So what that means is a number of chunks around the world spawn are never unloaded. Now, map makers have used that for a long time to put entities and command blocks and stuff like that needs to not be unloaded into those chunks, just to make sure that they don't accidentally go away. Now, we don't really want to have a number of arbitrary chunks loaded in the world there always, so we haven't done that. Instead, in this version, what we have is ticking areas, and those are what you control with these commands. Now, what is a ticking area? Well, a ticking area is simply an area that always gets loaded and keeps ticking entities, so things will keep working in those chunks, essentially. In order for that to be reasonable, you might want to see coordinates, and actually, you can do that if you have your world in creative mode. If you have cheats switched on, you can actually switch on show coordinates here now. So you can have coordinates in this version, and as you can see, game rule show coordinates has been updated to true. That's just a game rule. You can switch it on with the game rule command as well if you want. So you can actually see your position in the world. You do need to have cheats switched on for this though. Otherwise, getting achievements would be vastly easier. But anyway, /ticking area. So actually, we have about 964 and 0. So we could do ticking area add, and then you can do circle for a circular radius, or you can do from and to. This works essentially just like the sphere and the box selectors in selector arguments. But let's do a circle for now just because it's easier. We'll do 964 and 0 with a radius of, I don't know, 32. And then you give it a name. My area. Now this gives me an error saying radius cannot be larger than 4. And that is because these are not blocks. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. So if I wanted it 32, then I'll put 2 because these are chunks. And if we do that instead, then it says added ticking area centered at 904, 0, and 8 with a radius of 2 chunks. 1 out of 10 ticking areas in use. So we now have a ticking area and things here, around here. If I can figure out which, no, this way. So here's 900, and if I go within like a bunch of blocks here, then I will be within those limits. So if I go give myself, which is at S, remember, a command block, not a chain one, a command block. There we go, we've put this down, and we can put this to be a repeating command block that just says hi or something. This is going to be spammy, but it's going to prove my point. So this is going to start saying hi, and now we can leave this place. And normally that would unload that, but it just keeps going. It's going to keep saying hi, well, a very long time. Because I am no longer anywhere near that place. We're way over here now. And we have the ticking area, so that's why the thing still says hi. And if I do /ticking area list now, then you'll see that it says that we have that one ticking area, and then it scrolls off the screen because the command block is saying hi. So we can now remove that if we want, or we can do remove all. And also you can note that the list command has an all dimensions optional argument that you can use to, hello there sheep, that you can use to find all of them in all of the dimensions. But let's remove our ticking area again. We called it my area. And there you see it removes the ticking area, and it just immediately unloads it because we're so far away now. And the highs stop. Now, let's say that we were to teleport ourselves back to 900, whatever this happens to be, and 0. And you'll see that it loads the command block back in, and it starts saying hi again. So those are ticking areas, and that's the purpose of them. And you can use them to make sure that map logic for a minigame or for whatever it is that you're making is loaded in, or that an entity stays around if you need an entity for some form of state. Okay, had enough. Get rid of that rain, please. Now, for this version, it's probably mostly interesting to keep command blocks loaded inside of ticking areas, but I can see there being cases where you need an entity as well, and that will certainly be the case in future versions. And that, I believe, is pretty much all of the change in this version. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comment section down below, and I will try my best to answer anything that I can. Thank you very much for watching. My name is slicedlime, and I'll catch you in another video. Take care.